Albert Bandura agreed with Skinner that behavior is learned, but with that point, their similarity ends. Bandura criticized Skinner's emphasis on individual animal subjects rather than on human subjects interacting with one another. Bandura's approach is a social cognitive theory that investigates behavior as it is formed and modified in a social context. He argued that we cannot expect data from experiments that involve no social interaction to be relevant to the everyday real world because very few people live in social isolation. Although Bandura agreed with Skinner that much learning takes place as a result of reinforcement, he also stressed that virtually all forms of behavior can be learned without directly experiencing any reinforcement. Bandura's approach is also called observational learning, indicating the importance in the learning process of observing other people's behavior. Bandura presented a less extreme form of behaviorism than Skinner. He emphasized the observation of others as a means of learning, and he considered learning to be mediated by cognitive processes. Albert Bandura was born in Canada in 1925, but he has spent his entire professional life in the United States. He completed a PhD in clinical psychology at the University of Iowa in 1951, and since then has worked almost entirely at Stanford University, where he has been an active researcher and speaker. And he also was president of the American Psychological Association in 1974. Bandura's social cognitive theory takes an agentic perspective, meaning that humans have some limited ability to control their lives. In contrast to Skinner, Bandura recognizes that chance encounters and fortuitous events often shape one's behavior. The theory places more emphasis on observational learning or vicarious learning. It stresses the importance of cognitive factors in learning. It suggests that human activity is a function of behavior and person variables as well as the environment, and it believes that reinforcement is mediated by cognition. Continuing our overview of social cognitive theory, people regulate their conduct through internal and external factors. People have agency, which refers to the capacity of people to act independently and make their own free choices. So the chance meetings and fortuitous events we mentioned do not automatically have an effect. What is important is how we react or how we interpret these events. And people are flexible to learn new behaviors. Bandura agrees with Skinner that people learn through direct experience, but he emphasized vicarious learning. For example, infants learn to make and understand facial expressions. A new employee avoids being late for work after seeing a coworker fired for being late. A child learns to play a game while watching others. And a young girl watches a basketball game and shoots hoops without being explicitly taught how to do so. In morally ambiguous situations, people regulate themselves through moral agency. Moral agency can involve many things like distorting consequences, blaming victims, or displacing responsibility. Bandura takes a broad view of learning, believing that people learn through observing others and by attending to the consequences of their own actions. Although he believes that reinforcement aids learning, he contends that people can learn in the absence of reinforcement. The heart of observational learning is modeling, which is more than simple imitation because it involves adding to and subtracting from observed behavior. At least three principles influence modeling. First, people are most likely to model high-status people. Second, people who lack skill or status are most likely to model. And three, people tend to model behavior that they see as being rewarding to the model. Bandura also recognized four processes that govern observational learning: attention, or noticing what a model does; representation, or symbolically representing new response patterns in memory; behavior production, or producing the behavior that one observes; and motivation, that is, the observer must be motivated to perform the observed behavior. Enactive learning refers to the person's cognitive evaluation of the situation. All behavior is followed by some consequence, but whether that consequence reinforces the behavior depends on the person's cognitive evaluation of the situation. People must think about and process the consequences. The consequences inform us about the effects of our actions. Bandura said learning occurs more efficiently when the learner is mentally involved in the situation and understands what behaviors lead to success. So in summary, new behaviors are acquired through two kinds of learning: observational learning and inactive learning. Social cognitive theory holds that human functioning is molded by the reciprocal interaction of behavior, personal factors, including cognition, and environmental events, a model Bandura calls triadic reciprocal causation. Now, Bandura does not suggest that the three factors in the triadic reciprocal causation model make equal contributions to behavior. The relative influence of behavior, environment, and person depends on which factor is strongest at any particular moment. The lives of many people have been fundamentally changed by a chance meeting with another person or by a fortuitous, unexpected event. Chance encounters and fortuitous events enter the triadic reciprocal causation paradigm at the environment point, after which they influence behavior in much the same way as do planned events. The concepts of chance encounters and fortuitous events are fascinating ones. Regardless of how carefully people plan their lives, a chance encounter or fortuitous event may substantially alter their life's course. Just think about ways in which chance changed your life. Maybe you can think of an unplanned or unexpected event that led to your meeting a future spouse, or to an unpredictable event that changed a non-romantic relationship into a romantic one. Similarly, you may think of ways in which chance influenced a choice of curriculum or career. Human agency has four core features. One, intentionality, or a proactive commitment to actions that may bring about desired outcomes. Two, foresight, or the ability to set goals. Three, self-reactiveness, which includes monitoring their progress toward fulfilling their choices. And four, self-reflectiveness, which allows people to think about and evaluate their motives, values, and life goals. How people behave in a particular situation depends in part on their self-efficacy. That is, their beliefs that they can or cannot exercise those behaviors necessary to bring about a desired consequence. Efficacy expectations differ from outcome expectations, which refer to people's prediction of the likely consequences of their behavior. Self-efficacy combines with environmental variables, previous behaviors, and other personal variables to predict behavior. It is acquired, enhanced, or decreased by any one or combination of four sources: mastery experiences or performance, social modeling, or observing someone of equal ability succeed or fail at a task, social persuasion, or listening to a trusted person's encouraging words, and physical and emotional states such as anxiety or fear, which usually lowers self-efficacy. High self-efficacy and a responsive environment are the best predictors of successful outcomes. Bandura said self-efficacy is the foundation of human agency. Martin Seligman later introduced a concept called learned helplessness. This is where people lose their sense of self-efficacy and eventually give up trying. How does this happen? Well, an example would be someone who keeps applying for jobs and is continually turned down. They may engage in learned helplessness and simply give up trying. Bandura also said people can exercise control over their lives. Proxy agency is where people exercise some partial control over everyday living. Successful living in the 21st century requires people to seek proxies to supply their food, deliver information, provide transportation, and so on. Without the use of proxies, modern people would be forced to spend most of their time securing the necessities of survival. Collective agency is the level of confidence that people have that their combined efforts will produce social change. At least four factors can lower collective agency. First, events in other parts of the world can leave people with a sense of helplessness. Second, complex technology can decrease people's perceptions of control over their environment. Third, entrenched bureaucracies discourage people from attempting to bring about social change. And fourth, the size and scope of worldwide problems contribute to people's sense of powerlessness. By using reflective thought, humans can manipulate their environments and produce consequences of their actions, giving them some ability to regulate their own behavior. Bandura believes that behavior stems from a reciprocal influence of external and internal factors. Two external factors that contribute to self-regulation are standards of evaluation and external reinforcement. External factors affect self-regulation by providing people with standards for evaluating their own behavior. We learn from parents and teachers the value of honesty and cooperation. External factors also include rewards, like getting a good grade on an exam. Internal requirements for self-regulation include self-observation of performance, judging or evaluating performance, and self-reaction, including self-reinforcement or self-punishment. For example, rewarding yourself for reaching your goals. Internalized self-sanctions prevent people from violating their own moral standards, either through selective activation or disengagement of internal control. Selective activation refers to the notion that self-regulatory influences are not automatic, but operate only if activated. It also means that people react differently in different situations, depending on their evaluation of the situation. Disengagement of internal control means that people are capable of separating themselves from the negative consequences of their behavior. People in ambiguous moral situations who are uncertain that their behavior is consistent with their own social and moral standards of conduct may separate their conduct from its injurious consequences through four general techniques of disengagement of internal standards. First is redefining behavior or justifying otherwise reprehensible actions by cognitively restructuring them. A technique to redefine behavior is to make comparisons between that behavior and greater atrocities committed by others, like a child who vandalizes a school building and uses the excuse that others broke even more windows. Second, people can disengage their behavior from its consequences by displacing or diffusing responsibility, such as the bureaucrat who answers criticism by responding, "That's the way things are done around here." A third set of disengagement procedures involves dehumanizing or blaming the victims. People find violence easier if they don't consider the victims as human beings and blaming them for what is being done to them. A fourth method is to distort or obscure the relationship between behavior and its injurious consequences. People can do this by minimizing, disregarding, or distorting the consequences of their behavior. An example would be a parent who injures a child with a severe beating, but explains that one should not spare the rod because it may spoil the child. An interesting aspect of Bandura's theory is that dysfunctional behavior is learned through the mutual interaction of the person, including cognitive and neurophysiological processes, the environment, including interpersonal relations, and behavioral factors, especially previous experiences with reinforcement. People who develop depressive reactions often underestimate their successes and overestimate their failures. They set personal standards too high, or they treat themselves badly for their faults. Phobias are also learned by direct contact, inappropriate generalization, and observational experiences. Once learned, they are maintained by negative reinforcement, as the person is reinforced for avoiding fear-producing situations. When carried to extreme, aggressive behaviors can become dysfunctional. In a study of children observing live and filmed models being aggressive, Bandura and his associates found that aggression tends to foster more aggression. Bandura conducted his Bobo doll experiment by studying children's behavior after watching an adult model act aggressively toward a Bobo doll, a toy that gets up by itself to a standing position when it's knocked down. The experiment measured the children's behavior after seeing a model beating up the Bobo doll. Bandura found that the children exposed to the aggressive model were more likely to act in physically aggressive ways than those who were not exposed to the aggressive model. Bandura also found that the children exposed to the aggressive model were more likely to act in verbally aggressive ways than those who were not exposed to the aggressive model. The goal of social cognitive therapy is self-regulation. Bandura noted 3 levels of treatment. 1, induction of change, or instigating some change in behavior. 2, generalization of change to other appropriate situations. And 3, maintenance of newly acquired functional behaviors. Social cognitive therapists sometimes use systematic desensitization, a technique aimed at diminishing phobias through relaxation. The client will practice relaxation techniques while in the presence of the phobic stimulus. Bandura's concept of self-efficacy has generated a great deal of research demonstrating that people's beliefs are related to their ability to perform in a wide variety of situations, including academic performance. A study by Hampton and Mason hypothesized that students with learning difficulties would have lower ratings on all 4 sources of self-efficacy, namely mastery experiences, social modeling, social persuasion, and emotional status. The participants were high school students, half of whom had learning difficulties. The results supported the hypothesis that students with learning deficiencies had lower ratings on each of the 4 sources of self-efficacy. As a critique, Bandura's theory receives the highest marks of any in the text, largely because it was constructed through a careful balance of innovative speculation and data from rigorous research. In summary, the theory rates very high on its ability to generate research and on its internal consistency. In addition, it rates high on parsimony and on its ability to be falsified, organize knowledge, and guide the practitioner. In his concept of humanity, Bandura sees humans as being relatively fluid and flexible. People can store past experiences and then use this information to chart future actions. Bandura's theory rates near the middle on teleology versus causality and high on free choice, optimism, conscious influences, and uniqueness. As a social cognitive theory, it rates very high on social determinants of personality.